Okay, so the format is going to be similar to what we did last time. If for those of you that were present at the last conference, we had our elders panel, and what we did was we asked a series of questions, but here we're only going to ask 3 questions. How would you define or describe Wahutawin, the kinship family for your nation?
Actually, the proper way to say the word is wakumituin. That's the wakumituin kayaski tagon. Now that's the relationship between humans, between families, kinship. It was a law actually a long time ago that the elders made sure it was followed. And as we know today, because of certain things that happened along the way, people don't know who they're related to today. And it's because we've lost that connection between families. But it was a very important thing kaya sumawaku doing.
I also truly believe that. Like I seen it when I was growing up. And not only that too, but my mother herself really followed that kind of relationship with the family. Also, when I had stepkids, she considered them family as her grandchildren. She didn't that were her grandchildren. So it's a very special meaning when you're Iwaku Toatona.
Yeah, Wako Tuin is I was reviewing the notes from last conference, and Wako Tuin, you can see Wako Tuin about 3 or 4 times in a summary of the last conference. So, and Wako Tuin is a system of relation. If you break down Wako Tuin, you'll end up with an indigenous system of relations. And if you also break down, you'll also see that, and somebody told me this, one of the elders years ago, is that there are no cousins in our language. And there's only brothers and sisters. That's what you'll find out if you break down. So one of the ways that I can talk about establishing is setting relations is that, for example, what happened to me is that I'm not the oldest in my family. There were 2 other boys that came before me, and they passed when they were babies, infants. So what my mom and dad did is that they gave me to my uncle and an auntie, the whole pigihitzik, for them to raise me. So that's one way of establishing a relation, yeah. Meaning go yan. The other one is when I was being born in our island, there was another baby being born in another island, but that baby was died. But the parents of that child who died, they took me in as their son. And they always called me Ngoses throughout their lives when I was alive. And I did spend some time on and off with them. And to this day, their children call me brother. So another way of setting up a relationship. Even though I was not related in the family way. But And I suppose that's what customary care is, and customary adoption is. It's not really adoption as in the European way, but the ekiwahomichik. So that's one form of wahotun. So
I like everything that was said so far. It speaks to our way of living, way of being with each other. And I wanted to acknowledge Jordan River Anderson, the family, if they're here. My respect to you. Jordan River Anderson, his life, his short life, highlighted structural inequality in Canada when he couldn't go home and live on his community. He had a loving family there, but there's no services there. And the child welfare couldn't help him either. The provincial governments couldn't help him because they had their bureaucracy. Federal government had their rules and bureaucracies. They couldn't help him. And housing, there was not good housing for him. Lots of things were not there. That inequality was there. That people feel almost every day, the racism as well. And to this day, living in a city, I get followed around the stores when I walk in the store. Just because I'm brown, I might steal something. But I wanted to just echo what Moses said. Gidu Temenano, our community. Gidu Temenanook, that's our community. When I meet somebody from Oxford House, I'm always glad to meet them. When I meet somebody from another community, wherever they come from, I'm glad to meet them because they're part of Muskego Innuit, Swampy Cree. It doesn't matter where I go. If I go to Quebec, if I go to the Maritimes, I see somebody brown, those are my relatives because they have the same experience of inequality. And so I think there's been lots of hurt and pain that has been inflicted on people because of this inequality. And it's affected our relationships. It's affected our language. Our language, we can't speak our language that High Cree, that the old people know, that the ones that are still carrying it on to speak the language really good. I appreciate that. What William said yesterday and what Moses is saying today and the other elders here are saying today is very important. Those need to be taught to our people, our children. And I really like what Georgina Berg said yesterday. We need to know our history. There is where the relationships are. Wakumaganak, our community. That's where that is. And we have to really study our language because our children are
Yeah, about elders there, the way they talk, they used to, well, they're not used to, they would even talk English, even my mom. We didn't even talk English, and my dad spoke a little English, so we said, how are you getting these words? He asked. He said, all these white men coming to the reserve, taking our language away. And then, but, so he told us, don't really go into that English stuff. Like, he just tried to be a white man, your dad. That's why they got getting in trouble trying to keep English and what kind of language is that? And we tried to, and they wouldn't let us speak English. My mom just brought up with that because they were a partial Scotian, I guess. So I don't know how to keep this reserve getting English and Cree at the same time. Like, now you see that it's not even a Cree word out of the school. They should ought to try to keep their language. Not like the elders trying to keep the English, but now the kids can't even talk to them in Cree. That's how bad it is now. And I heard that the teachers who came in don't wanna kids to speak Cree, only English, and that's no good. Can't teach children like that. They were just trying to stay with their language.
Anyway, how do you define or describe customary care or customary adoption in your nation?
Customary care in my community, just from my life, my family's experience. I grew up with the Colin family in Oxford House, and as I was growing up, I had lots of brothers, those Colin boys. The old man is William Colin, and George Colin was. They were both chiefs in my community, and we're not related by blood at all. Those with them. As I understand it, my father was adopted customarily by this old man, William Colin. And as Moses had referred to earlier, when the community saw a need for adoption to take place, it was done automatically by an agreement within the families, even if they're not related. They immediately, by law, by their own law, they didn't have to sign no papers, and that responsibility was carried by that family. They became my brothers, those ones, and they became the old man became my grandfather. That old man, William Colin. This is how I grew up, and later on, my sister got adopted by my maternal grandmother. As I understand it, she was losing her eyesight, my maternal grandmother, and we're related to them. I mean, when we left Oxford House in 1957, we left her behind. I did not grieve her because she was with my grandmother, and I knew she was well loved and well taken care of. And so to this day, there is custom adoption within families, but there's also custom adoption with other people in the community. When there was a tragedy of some kind, somebody stepped in to take care of those children automatically when somebody needed it. So it was a law that was in place at the time. And so what we have to look at, I'm on the committee as well, we have to make sure we can facilitate those kind of arrangements without all this legal form signing that is required in Canadian law, Manitoba law. We can't have that. We have to facilitate those agreements without a big long delay. And we have to make sure that the the systems we create in our law account for that, so that there's no disputes. The disputes are settled by a process that's guided by customary law.
Customary adoption, I think, was very, very important. Yes, it was very important to our people. If anything happened with families, that was a top priority, the safety of the children. And if there were aunts and uncles, that would take those children and look after them, that's good. This way it kept the children in the community, they kept them together. With my family, when I'm the youngest in my family, and when I was living in Churchill, there were some children that got apprehended. There was a brother and sister, and they were Dene. My parents took those two in. They wanted to make sure that they weren't separated. Because a lot of times then, the children were taken out of the community, and lots of times we haven't seen or heard from them since. And then there was another group of children that got apprehended, so that was my uncle's grandchildren. And my mother took one girl. They asked if she would look after her for 6 days. 6 days turned into 6 weeks. 6 weeks turned into 6 months. So when they came back to talk to my parents after 6 months, my parents said, no, we want to keep her now for good. We don't want to give her back to CFS because we don't know where she'll end up. That was a big family, and they were separated in that time, which must have been really hard. So she grew up with us. My mom and dad sat us down and said, you guys have a little sister now. We all have to look after her. We have to work together and look after her, which is good. So, you learn all these things when you're young, how to look after yourself. The respect is a very, very important laws that we have, because you learn from the time that you're young to respect yourself, to respect others, older people, the women, the men, the boys, and then you learn to respect everything else that's on Usky, the land, because it's a land that provides for us. But my grandmother used to talk about other families that lost either one parent, and because they had children, it wasn't long before that person found another partner because of the children. They needed to look after the children, and if they couldn't, then the aunts and uncles were the ones that would come in and help. But they were never given away. And I forgot his name, said, you didn't have to wait for papers to be signed. They were it was just a natural thing to take those children and look after them, because that's how it was done, Gayas.
When a child lost a parent, sometimes the father or the mother would remarry, but sometimes the family, other family members would take the child and grow up with that family and also take the last name. And that was one of the customary adoptions. But today I see that the word that's being used right now today is not as what I hear is that that person was brought up by this family. There's no empathy in it, so it makes it look like that person's an outsider. That's how I see it. But we need, like that guy said, we need to go back and start teaching the values of customary adoption, and also wahuhtun, as a wahuhtunanoa. That's important because we're getting away from that. We're losing it. And it has a lot of, it was brought on by a lot of obstacles. And if we want to do something, it's up to us to do it. Like, we can't depend on anybody. Like myself, I barely speak Cree. Like I speak Cree here because I see people are talking Cree. But at home, hardly anybody speaks the language. Only maybe Sophie and Mary speak the language, and we don't get together that much. And I feel like I'm losing my language because nobody's carrying it on. And I try to talk Cree to my kids and my grandchildren, and they look at me like, and I have to interpret for them. And that part, I take responsibility for that. I admit that I am not pushing it.
As Don was saying, all these customary adoptions are still going on. And I suppose what we have to do is put that into in writing, put that on paper. And as Canada, I think what Canada wants us to do that, to put our laws on paper, to put our laws into writing. That's what they mean by passing a law. So how, I suppose the question is, how do we put these customary adoptions that we're all talking about in writing without making it, you'll see that the adoptions that we're talking about are not permanent. In my case, I went back and forth between, well, actually I had 3 sets of parents actually, but I went back and forth between my real parents, my biological parents, and my auntie and uncle. I went back and forth, especially when I was older. And then I finally I spent more time with my biological parents at the end when I was older. So it's not permanent, the things that we're talking about here, customary. So how do we put that into a law? And how do we put that in writing, what we're talking about here, and other forms of wahotun? And that's what the working group is doing, has to do. And then without bringing in formality or paper stuff in writing. So I don't know. That's one of the things we have to do. We have to figure out as we develop our law.
Is there anything specific that you would like to see included in the nation's child and family law?
Elder Ogimau here was talking about customary adoption not being permanent. With our people, customary adoption was permanent. That was our way of life. That's what we did. But today it's not permanent because we are still thinking the Western or the white man's way. And everything has to be written down on paper. A long time ago, everything was passed down orally. So is there some way we can make a law that makes our customary adoption as Indigenous people permanent?
I've been dealt with child and family services over the years, and some are good and some are bad, and like the customary adoption that was done over the years, like Mrs. Beardy said, to be put in law. Because when you say a word, or when you agree with words with one another, that's final and it's approved, and the community approves that. And I think that needs to be understood by the white man's law. But it needs to be interpreted in a solid way that it could be recognized in the federal and provincial law. Because when you agree to something by word, that's like making a deal with someone, and if you back out on that deal, then you're not a good person.
Your word is,
I don't want to say it, but you're not a trusty person, and that's important when we deal with stuff like that. Is that we have to trust one another and be honest, and also with the customary adoption when it comes to wahutun, like that means with everybody, not just your siblings or your auntie and all that. And a lot of it has to do with love. Sakitun. Isakiya na nagawa humagan, you know? And compassion. Igitimaganimat.
Again, in my case, the adoption, was not permanent. I went back and forth between my real parents and all that. But I suppose in some cases it's adoption, customary adoption is understood by the parties to be permanent. Now, I know of no case in my community that's happened. So, but today, I suppose we have to decide whether we want to formalize or make customary adoptions permanent. We can say that in our law for today's purposes. It's up to us to decide what we want to put in our law when we write it. It's up to us to meet today's issues and circumstances. So it's up to us. Keep our traditional laws, or do something else. Or I don't know. It's up to us. What do we want to put in our law? What do we want? What part of our laws we want to put on paper? As Canada wants us to do. So it's up to us, really.
I would like to see the elders, their language, their interpretations of how customary adoption was done, and wahutun was done. I'd like to see that in a library, our own library, that young people these days they're into what do you call those things there? I have a language app here. I can just click on it. There's a library of Cree in there. I have 3 apps on my phone here. The kids are really into those things now. Technology, way more than I am. But if they can just click on the app, they can hear the stories of the elders, the language speakers, the really fluent ones, and so they can be proud of that.
Awesome. You bet for that. That's like my first 3 slides. That's great. Can you see my PowerPoint?
yes, we can.
Okay, great. Fabulous. I only have so many screens, so I can see. Oh, look, and I can see you. That's awesome. Good morning. Is it morning still there? Yeah, it's morning.
Yes.
Morning here. So yes, Miigwech, thank you for that introduction. I am coming to you from Victoria, the unceded territory of the Lekwungen and Sinchothan speaking people. And I'm going today, as soon as I can figure out how to move my slide. There we go. Sorry, just trying to figure it out. Go through a few things that I was asked to share about our work with Indigenous law at ILRU. I understand you also had somebody from Wakotoan Lodge come and speak the other day. So some of this might be a little bit of overlap, although I'm hoping the application won't be, because the director of Wakotoan Lodge, Dr. Hadley Friedland, was one of the founders of ILRU. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about our methodology, so the way that we get to Indigenous law from the work that we do, and then I'm going to apply that to a project that we did that was actually on family law, Anishinaabe family law, and then I'm going to raise some questions about Indigenous law moving forward. So this was just introduced. So yeah, came out of a project with the TRC, the Truth Reconciliation Commission, and the Indigenous Bar Association, and 2 reports emerged, and that was about 11 years ago. Since then, we have worked with over 500 community partners, people, in over 50 Indigenous communities across the country. We focus largely on BC because we believe in doing things where we live. Also, some of our funding is connected to BC, but again, we have some projects in the Yukon right now, as well as we've had in Ontario. And then implementation and evaluation is where a lot of the big ones are. How is it implemented? Who determines how it's going to be? How do we know that it's being taken seriously by other legal orders or institutions? This is a big one for C92. Does Indigenous law continue to be Indigenous law if it is given force by non-Indigenous legal instruments? So once those laws are codified and put into practice, they become subject to Canadian law as well. So you have to, those kinds of considerations of what to consider when you're doing it. And then I'm really interested as well in Indigenous legal orders interacting with each other, right? We've always had neighbors, we've always had ways of interacting with each other. How are we going to do that as we all start to redevelop and breathe life back into our laws? And then there's just more questions. Issues of jurisdiction. Are there other examples that in the world we can look to? Should the practice be regulated? All those sorts of things. So I don't mean to end on a bunch of unanswered questions, but I was asked to share some of the things we've learned in our work, and these are some of the big questions. So
working with lawyers is always an interesting process because they have a language that few people can understand and writing that's very hard to understand. So I was wondering how long the process is that you described when you're working with communities, because we're in the midst of that process here in Manitoba, in trying to get Bill C-92, our own laws, into the community, and we do have good lawyers. How long does all that take to make it really, really understandable and applicable to us? And the elders, we were on a panel this morning. We have to make it understandable in our language. It has to be the way we think, not the way lawyers think, not the way Manitoba government thinks or federal government thinks. It has to be our own way. So how long do you? I mean, it's hard. That's a hard question, but
it is a hard question. But no, you're right. The process. So for us to do this work in English and to get to from beginning to end of just a report is 2 to 3 years.
Okay.
And then and we talk a lot. We have a lot of conversations about the language and how do we translate it into the language, or should it ever be translated out of the language. And I have a 100-year goal for that. Just everyone will just be speaking our language, all of them. But it takes about 2 or 3 years just to get to the principles.
Okay.
And then generally a translation would probably take another year or so. But in saying that, if you're working, you could partner with people who are speaking the language, right? Who researchers. So maybe you never have to translate it out of Cree. Like maybe there's a way that people who already speak the language are helping with those focus groups or helping with the language, and so you could do some linguistic analysis.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes it very complicated.
Yeah.
When it comes to writing it in a way that's readable in English, a good researcher, a good writer should be able to do that in the same amount of time.
Okay.
So it's still 2 to 3 years, but getting it into doing translation is it's a very big question. It's absolutely a big question.
Thank you. That kind of answers my question.
They never used a lawyer.
Yeah.
So my question then is, do we need a lawyer?
No, I don't think that you do.
No?
Okay, listen, I need you to know that's not legal advice. So one of our specific work, because so much of our work is about translating Indigenous law for largely Canadian people who understand Canadian law, our researching it, we have law degrees. But the only real reason is because we want the work to translate it. And so we need to have that familiarity with the Canadian legal system to do this specific work. To just access Indigenous law, no, you don't need a law degree. People have law, you have your own law degrees. People have those people who run ceremony, those people who have been doing this work forever. That's the law degree. So no, I don't think you need a law degree at all to articulate your own law. Again, not legal advice.
Yeah. Yeah, but he also said that at the end of when they put their law in writing in a piece of legislation, that's when they used a lawyer.
That's when, yes.
But the
that would make
lawyer
sense.
came from their own nation, so and
Yeah.
then she spoke the language and all that, so she organized the legislation. So that's when they used their own lawyer from their own. So the other thing is that my question is that you said something about when we put our laws into writing and on a piece of legislation. You said something about that law becomes subject to Canadian law, or
Yeah, so
Can you
I mean,
explain-
I don't know enough about how C92 is rolling out. I think when I was chatting with the organizers, I know a lot of people have looked at PEGWIS. PEGWIS is sort of the first in the country to implement their laws under C92. So, but what I understand from that is that there are ways to have your own like appeal process and administrative process in that. But what happens is the section that says in C92 that says it's called referential incorporation. I know, law words. And it just means that the law that you create, it's given power and force and effect by the Canadian legislation. So that means that yes, it's technically subject. So it has to do things like follow the charter. It has probably, I don't know, it might go to court, we'll find out. But as it stands, the assumption is that law is being given power by the Canadian legislation, if it's used in that way.
Okay, our first question from the breakout session was, how can we ensure that parents and families have adequate support in navigating the child welfare system? Some of the answers were regular communication on the subjects by having conferences and gatherings with the community, so that way everyone's well informed on what is happening. We need the people that work with the agencies to have regular communication with the family to ensure that the policies and laws are actually being held up after we establish them. And also all the workers in the community that's included in the CFS and everything, they need to be properly trained once we establish the new laws and how we're gonna go about organizing and facilitating these things. And we need to uphold our laws to our own standards and not run it the way provincial and federal government do things. Next page. We need to properly explain to our people why our customs the way that they are, explain the reason for it, and how come things are happening the way that they are. And another comment was made that leadership also needs to come and support these workers to help establish things. And we need women's and elder groups. They need to get together for support. We need to bring back the honor of families. He said that both a man and a woman need to share the responsibility of raising children, not just one or the other. Establish a firm identity to our own laws and our communities. Next one.
The second question is there anything specific that you would like to see included in the nation's child and family law? More youth involved. One lady had talked about a young woman who, has, let's say, 2 kids and doesn't want to speak to an adult. So some youth mentors in the community who can speak to that young person. Yes. And they must be Indigenous. And if that okay. Okay, and then for the service providers, they should be Indigenous, because one thing we heard in the group was that there's people who come into the communities who are hard to understand, and they don't feel comfortable talking to that person. So it must be an Indigenous person, and should be able to speak the language if the language is needed. If you're talking to a grandmother whose first language is let's say, Cree or Dene. And that the law should also include that all preventative measures must be exhausted prior to taking the children from the parents, calling appropriate caregivers in the community, respite worker, support worker, and emergency food must be available. Must consult with on-call elders, so having an elder who would be on call to consult with prior to that children being taken away. And that's it. Thank you very much.